As I've been looking through other content creators and other videos about 3D printing for tabletop gaming, I've been noticing that they kind of touch on the same things a lot. They touch on when you print with the resin printer, using warm water helps to remove those supports. They touch on various other things with printing, but there's a lot of things that I feel like they just don't mention. And I don't know if they don't mention them because they're not, in their mind, a big deal. But a lot of these things, in my mind, were huge. And so I thought, hey, why not put together a video of, let's say, 20 things that people don't tell you about 3D printing. And that's what this is. So, hint number one. You can leave resin in the vat as long as you want. Okay, but remember that resin separates. So, before you print anything, you can see how it's separated there. Make sure that you're mixing it up. And that goes with in the bottle as well. Make sure that you shake that resin before you put it in, or you're going to get stuff that just is not going to look the way that you want it to. Tip number 2. When you are 3D printing miniatures in resin, or 3D printing anything in resin, the longer that you cure it, the harder it becomes, which also means the more brittle it becomes. So if you have a little miniature like this that, if it drops, you don't want it to break, don't cure it for as long. Make those little swords wiggle a little bit, and they'll be just fine. It's still a great miniature. It's still a great print. But now I don't have to worry about it breaking if it drops. If your miniatures are breaking, that's probably the reason, is because they're a little too brittle, because they've been cured for a little too long. So turn down a little bit. And along with that goes my tip number 3, and that is that you don't have to have a curing station and a washing station. You don't need all that stuff. My curing station is a light that I hold. I print my miniatures, I put them down on a tray, and I hold that light right over the top of it. And then I flip them over. And I cure them for as long as I want. It's not a big deal. You can buy flashlights that are UV lights. If you don't have any of those things, take them outside. The sun is UV light.
The power of the sun.
And it will cure them for you. So you don't have to spend all this extra money. My washing station is a nice big container with a screw-on lid of isopropyl alcohol. And I just put the miniatures in there and I rinse them. You don't have to buy them. Do those things make it easier? Yeah, they make it a ton easier. But they also take up a lot of space and they're a lot of money. So you get to decide if you want to do those ones. If you don't like the color of your resin, with some alcohol inks and a couple drops, you can change the color of your resin. And then just mix it up. Okay, number 5, this little screen down here is called the LCD screen. And every 3D printer that has an LCD screen, it has a limited life. You're only going to get, 8,000 blinks out of it.
Blink, 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 blinkety blink.
Or whatever it is. Each one's a little different, but just kind of keep in mind that it will not last forever. So it's beneficiary to you to put more stuff on the build plate when you build. Instead of just doing one thing and wasting all of those flashes of light, fill up the whole board, because ultimately it will just save you the life on your 3D printer. Tip number 6 is that when you're printing big miniatures, when you're printing bigger objects, you can have them be solid or you can hollow them out. But if you hollow them out, you have to put holes in them that are big enough for the resin to come through. And resin's not like water, it's a little thicker. So the holes have to be relatively good sized for it to drain out as the thing is printing. Because remember, everything that prints upside down. And so it's got to drain out of this as it's printing. So just kind of keep that in mind. You can do it. You have to make holes. In most printing programs, they'll print you a little plug for that hole that looks just the way it should. And you can just kind of slide it in there and cure it afterwards. But it will help you save money on resin but it's also harder. It's a lot harder to do because you got to put it in there. You got to make it look right when you're done. So kind of a toss up there when making big things. On to hint number 7 with that is that the bigger something is, the more resin it's going to take. And your vat in your printer has a max fill line. And a lot of things are going to require more resin than that. So what does that mean? It means that while it's printing, you're going to have to put in more resin. You're going to have to add to that. Some people have bad luck, have had bad luck with that. I've had pretty good luck with it. I just wait until it's down as low as it needs to go, put in a little bit of resin, let it lift, come back down, put in a little more resin. I do my best to not upset what's there and what's being used. And then as it prints, it will just pull in whatever extra you had to add. A couple of tips when you're printing with FDM are these. Printing it on an FDM printer uses a roll of filament, which is this up here, and it's different materials. This one you can see is PLA plus, and it's just clear. That has to be dry in order to print. If it's not dry, your print's going to have bubbles in it. It's going to have all sorts of weird stuff in it. With that being said, down here on our print bed, here's another tip. I just have a glass print bed. This is just glass. To get things to stick to it, you can spray hairspray or glue stick. And it comes off easy, it washes off, it's not a big deal. And it just helps things stick there. Some printers don't need that. You don't need anything. It'll just stick fine. Depending on what your bed's made of, stuff is more sticky than others. For me, I've always used the glue stick and it has always worked really well. So if you're having trouble sticking stuff to your build plate, give that a try. Okay, next tip. This is a vat. Okay, this is what you pour your resin into when you're 3D printing on a resin printer. Okay, and it has this FEP sheet is what it's called, FEP sheet. And a lot of people don't know this, but when you are printing on the vat, the print comes down and it sticks to the bottom of the vat. And every time it pulls up, it's got to pull off of that. That's why sometimes you'll see people print and the supports will be there, but nothing else will be there. And that's because whatever connection you have between the support and the actual model is not strong enough to keep it from pulling it off. Okay, so keep in mind, it sticks to the bottom and to the top of the arm, right, that goes up and down. But if you're getting supports all the time when you're printing and nothing else, lots of factors could be affecting that. Either it's pulling up too fast. You can put like lubricant on the FEP sheet, and that will make it so it doesn't stick to that as much as well. So there's a couple different things you can do, but just kind of keep that in mind with anything that you're printing, is that it sticks to this too. And so if the supports are too weak or something like that, that's why it's going to fail. Okay, it doesn't just come down there and sit and then come back up and down and up and down. It literally sticks to this and pulls it off. Every time it comes off, it's got to pull it off. Okay, with that being said, something to talk about with supports. When you buy miniatures from most companies, they'll give them to you pre-supported, right? Pre-supported. It means that they put the supports on the figure themselves. And they've tested it usually, and so that when it prints, you won't have a problem with it. It'll just print the way it's supposed to. You don't have to attach supports. It's the easiest way to do them. Something to keep in mind with pre-supported miniatures, though, is that if you change their size at all, you are also changing the size of the supports. So if you make the model bigger, you're going to make the supports bigger. The supports will be stronger. It's going to be a lot harder to get them off. If you make the mini smaller, you make the supports smaller. And so a lot of the time, resizing a pre-supported miniature is a bad idea. Every now and then it'll work. If you're only changing it a little bit, shouldn't have much of a problem. But if you're dropping it 50%, I would say even 25%, you're going to have issues. You're going to start having issues. Could it still print? Sure. Is it going to be consistent? Probably not. Especially if you're going smaller. If you're going bigger, it'll still work. The supports are just going to be a bear to get off. Back to the FEP sheet. Okay. If stuff sticks to the bottom of this FEP sheet, they give you a little plastic spatula. You saw it in my video where I I'm mixing the inks and stuff like that. I am doing that super lightly, and I'm doing my best to not touch the FEP sheet. Nothing should touch this. If you need to clean something off of an FEP sheet, you should be using the maintenance mode of your printer, whatever that is. Don't use anything to peel something off. Okay, if something is stuck to the bottom of this, make sure that you're doing it in a way that you're not going to scratch this, because one scratch to this and you've got a hole, and that could cause a million other problems. So don't use the spatula. I know they give you two. Don't use them in there. There's no reason to. If you have any questions, let me know. I'll explain. You shouldn't have any reason to use that spatula inside of this vat. Okay, so something else to keep in mind. A lot of the printers that you get will come, they either need a USB. This is actually the USB that came with mine. I thought it was kind of a cool little USB drive, but I mean, this, right? This is what you're used to seeing with the USB. It'll come with this for resin, and for miniatures, it's going to come with, or for an FDM printer, it usually comes with a little thing like this that takes a small one of these, a small SD card. Okay, and you slide it into the back of that and whatever. A lot of these printers will not be able to read an SD card that's bigger than 32 gigs. So if you're putting it in and you can't see anything and you're wondering what's going on, if the SD card is bigger than 32 gigs, that's probably your problem. So 32 gigs or smaller. It should have come with one. Use that. They're cheap to buy because they're so small. So if you need a new one, get a new one. Something that I should have pointed out when I was shooting my video out in my garage with my FDM printer, it has to be level. It has to be level, and it needs a solid base. I've seen videos where people put them on, big cinder blocks and things like that. That's fine. I don't think you need to go that crazy, but it needs to be solid. It needs to be flat. If there's any wobble in your 3D print, it's going to cause problems. Because that thing is moving around, and if you're printing quickly, it's jerking around so fast that it just moves. And if your printer has any rock to it, it's going to cause you problems. So if you're having failed prints, check your base. Make sure it's nice and solid, and that printer isn't moving around when it prints. A lot of the time you'll see people printing with time-lapse. So a lot of the time you'll see people doing time-lapse with their resin printers. And it's like, well, how do I do that when it's got, this resin-proof casing on it? As long as you're in a room with normal lights, they don't have any UV rays or anything in them generally. And so you can take that case off of your resin printer if you want to do those prints. You don't have to have that case on it. As long as you're inside, there's no light coming from the outside. It's just UV light that cures the resin, not normal light, so don't worry about that. Now, something else that I see people complain about all the time when it comes to an FDM printer is that it prints and it has those layer lines. Every printer has layer lines. The difference between resin and FDM is that because of the nature of FDM printing, they're bigger. They have to be. That's what happens when you're taking it. It just isn't small enough. Whereas with a resin printer, it is. And so you don't see those things. And so people are always talking about, how do you smooth out an FDM printer? And there's tons of ways to do it. I've seen different things with different chemicals and different stuff. You can sand them. Okay, sanding's probably one of the cheapest ways to do it, obviously, because you just get some sandpaper, you sand it down, it should be fine. If you're doing tiny things, you can get a file that you would use for doing your fingernails or whatever, and you can file stuff down, and you can get pretty small files. The other thing is that resin. If you have a resin printer and an FDM printer, you can just paint a little bit of that resin right on over the top of it, and it'll just sit in those cracks, and then you cure it, and guess what? You have a smooth miniature. Okay, and with that tip comes another tip. Resin is really cool because you can use it as glue. If you have cracks in your FDM, you put if you have cracks in any of your models, you get a little paintbrush, you just paint that resin in between the cracks.
Cover that butt crack.
Hit it with a UV light, and it turns solid. So you can use resin as glue, you can use it as a crack filler, and you can use it to smooth out other things. So, just having some resin around could be useful. Even if you don't have a resin printer, it could be helpful with other things. So just kind of keep that in mind. And with the UV lights, I have a big one probably about this big, that I plug in, but I also have one of those little click flashlights that you can use, and it was $3. So cheap to buy, nice to have. Just another tip when it comes to 3D printing with resin. This little tray that I'm pulling off that's got all these prints on it. When I have pulled all these prints off, I can put this tray right back on, and it'll slide back in where it's supposed to go. And if I tighten it, I'm good to print again. I don't need to re-level it, redo everything. I mean, should you re-level it every now and then? Yeah, but I think you can do 4 or 5 prints easily before you have to level it again. So don't feel like you have to do that every single time. And if you do have to do it every single time, you're probably not doing it tight enough. Little tips, if this is the first thing you're watching when it comes to getting into 3D printing, obviously, is just cost of resin versus FDM. And I have other videos you can check out that go way into more detail. But what I'm going to talk about is just what one roll of filament costs for an FDM printer. It's a kilogram roll of filament. And what one, actually got one right here, 1 kilogram of resin costs. Okay? Or 1,000 grams right there. Okay? Same volume. Do they put out the same amount of miniatures? No, it's vastly different just depending on what you're doing with them, what you're making with them, obviously. But the resin is going to cost you $20 to $30 for this size. $20 to $30. The FDM in that big roll is going to cost you $10 to $20. And I mean, I guess I should change that a little bit. It's probably going to be closer to $15 to $25, depending on where you find it. If you buy in bulk, you can get them both for a lot less, but the resin's always going to be $5 to $10 more than the FDM. So just a little tip, something for you to know. And then the last thing that I wanted to talk about with all of this is that 3D printing is hard. It is a hobby in and of itself. You know, if you love Warhammer, if you love D&D and you have all these miniatures and things like that, and you want a 3D printer just to supplement it, it might be worth just buying the miniatures right out. Okay? With that being said, 3D printing is so much fun. It's incredible. It is one of the best things that I've ever invested time into. And I love it because I love creating these things. I love seeing these files that other people have, but I like creating those files too. So plugging in, to 3D printing, getting into it as a hobby for me was awesome. Because I like to 3D print. I like the work that goes into it. I like looking at something and being like, I made this, And so it's fun. And I don't think content creators talk about that enough. It is a lot of work. It is hard. And it will take hours of your time to figure out how things work and to get things running smoothly. But once you've invested that original time, like you have to do for any hobby, it is one of the most things out there. And I get so much satisfaction from taking a print from gloop, resin, all the way to a printed model that I get to put on the tabletop, that I get to paint and make it look the way that I want. That to me is 100% worth it. So those are my 20 tips about 3D printing. I hope you enjoyed that. I enjoyed making this. I've got another video that I hope to be putting out at the beginning of this next week. If not, it'll be Friday, just like normal. But I hope to get 2 videos out next week because I missed one last week. But if you like these videos, please please subscribe, follow the channel, help this channel grow. And as this channel grows, I promise to make better videos. I promise to bring in more content. And I promise to put some of my time into making a game for our community. The next video I'm going to be putting out is going to be talking about the lore to the game that I want to create, which is Pulsegate. And so I hope you tag along. I hope you get to see that video and learn a little bit more about what I'm planning with PulseGate and see a little bit of the work that I've done for it so far. So until then, just always remember, don't spend so much time creating your world that you forget to spend some time in it. Hopefully one day we'll get to spend some time in it together. Until next time.